You know, the Spitfire, the Mustang, the Zero, machines that became symbols of aerial mastery. But war is also a laboratory for bad ideas, and some fighters didn't just fail on the drawing board. Pilots came to distrust them, avoid them, or outright refuse to fly them. This is a countdown of 6 fighter planes from World War II that earned the scorn of the aircrews they were supposed to protect. If you love deep dives into aircraft history, subscribe and stay with me. This is where design hubris meets harsh air combat reality. 6. Fiat CR.42 Falco, Italy, introduced 1939. Designed as a nimble biplane fighter, the CR.42 was the last gasp of a doctrine that prized turning ability above all else. In the late 1930s, Fiat delivered a finely balanced biplane, light, highly maneuverable, and beloved by pilots for its handling. But by 1939, the air war was migrating to faster armored monoplanes. The CR.42's fabric-covered wings and open cockpit left it exposed to fire that newer fighters shrugged off. Its straight-line speed lagged behind monoplanes even when it could outturn them in a dogfight. In early clashes, especially when Italian units encountered Hurricanes and Spitfires over the Mediterranean, the Falco's vulnerabilities became obvious. Quick, hard hits could set the fabric alight or disable control surfaces that had no armor to protect them. The operational consequence was inevitable. By 1941, many CR.42s were moved away from contested air superiority roles or relegated to ground attack, reconnaissance, or training duties. Pilots respected its liveliness, but the era of the biplane had passed, and flying one into the teeth of modern interceptors felt increasingly like entering a lost cause. 5. Curtiss Wright, CW-21 Demon, United States Sear exports first flown 1938. The Demon was a radical attempt at a very light, climb-focused interceptor. Minimal structure, excellent rate of climb, and the promise of reaching bombers quickly. That lightweight philosophy paid off on paper but at terrible cost in practice. The CW-21 saved weight by skimping on protective features. Little to no armor, a largely unprotected cockpit, and non-self-sealing fuel tanks that could erupt if hit. In the early Pacific campaigns and in the Dutch East Indies, pilots flying exported CW-21s found that a single burst from an enemy fighter or ground fire could turn the airplane into an immediate hazard. Production numbers remained tiny, only around 60 were built, and high loss rates in combat theaters where Japanese fighters dominated meant the type never reached its potential. The idea of a disposable sprinter to climb to interceptors looked clever, until pilots saw how quickly a lightweight airframe could become a burning wreck. Tactically interesting, but deadly in practice. 4. Lavochkin Le-3, Soviet Union, entered service mid-1940s, wartime production period. The early Lavochkin fighters were born in haste. Faced with the German invasion, Soviet industry pushed designs forward quickly, often prioritizing quantity over refinement. The La-3 was intended as a frontline fighter that could match or outpace Luftwaffe types. In some prototypes and early production runs, the design suffered from rushed manufacturing and inconsistent quality control. Substitutions in materials, hurried assembly, and engines that in service didn't always deliver the promised punch. Some early crews reported a bleak combination of underpowered engines and fragile construction in frontline conditions. Contemporary voices described the morale hit plainly, with some pilots griping that the cockpit felt like a risky proposition in mixed combat environments. The response was pragmatic. The La-3 was supplemented and ultimately superseded by improved Lavochkin models that corrected its shortcomings. The key takeaway is industrial desperation. When production must be fast, performance and durability can be casualties, and pilots are left to pay the price. 3. Bolton Paul Defiant, United Kingdom, introduced to RAF service 1940. The Defiant began life as an ingenious tactical experiment, a single-engined fighter armed not with fixed forward-firing guns, but with a powered dorsal turret operated by a gunner. The theory was that a two-man crew could present a lethal defensive arc and ambush enemy fighters from unexpected angles. But air combat in 1940 was unforgiving to concepts that sacrificed offensive flexibility. The Defiant had no forward guns to engage targets in a head-on fight. and its performance in fast dives or tight chases lagged behind contemporary single-seat fighters. Initially, the Defiant enjoyed surprising success against unprepared attackers. Pilots and gunners scored hits during early actions. But once German pilots adapted their tactics, the aircraft's vulnerabilities were brutally exposed. On missions over northern France and the Low Countries, some squadrons suffered catastrophic losses in daylight operations. After a string of such encounters, the type was withdrawn from daytime fighter duties and refitted as a night fighter and bomber destroyer where its turret had more utility. The Defiant is a textbook case of a thoughtful idea that collided with the realities of a rapidly evolving aerial battlefield. 2. Brewster F-2A Buffalo, United States. Adopted into U.S. service early 1940s. When the Brewster Buffalo arrived, it was marketed as a modern carrier-based replacement, sleek lines, enclosed cockpit, and the promise of reliable performance. But the version that reached U.S. Navy and Marine squadrons had accumulated a series of weight-adding modifications, extra armor, more radios, larger fuel tanks, that turned a promising airframe into a heavier, underpowered fighter. The result was sluggish acceleration, poor climb rates, and marginal maneuverability compared with the nimble Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0. In early Pacific engagements, notably in the Philippines and the Dutch East Indies, Buffalo squadrons suffered heavy losses against superior Japanese tactics and aircraft, and some crews came to refer to certain deliveries in bleak terms. Contemporary reports from the front captured that frustration, though performance varied widely depending on the variant and theater. It's important to underline the nuance. In Finnish service against Soviet types, export versions of the Buffalo performed credibly, benefiting from lighter equipment and different tactical conditions. The core lesson is that the wrong variant, deployed in the wrong theater against the wrong opponent, can turn a decent design into a fatal liability. 1. Bachenbach 349 Natter, Germany, 1944-45 late war program. If any aircraft embodies wartime desperation, it's the Natter. Conceived as a point defense rocket interceptor, the BA 349 was meant to be launched vertically, climb rapidly to bomber altitude, fire its rockets at Allied formations, and then allow the pilot to bail out or the nose section to separate and deploy a parachute. The concept sprang from a dire need to stem bomber raids in Germany's closing months, but it was deeply experimental and inherently risky. The airframe was simple to the point of fragility, rocket propulsion was still a perilous frontier, and the procedures for manned vertical launch were primitive and unforgiving. During manned trials in 1945, a fatal flight claimed the life of test pilot Lothar Sieber. Contemporary accounts record the crash without gloss. The event underscored the dangers of turning unproven rocket technology into a manned weapon. After that tragedy and the collapse of Germany's industrial capacity, the program was effectively abandoned. The Natter's brief history reads as a sobering reminder. Extreme innovation under extreme pressure can create machines that are as lethal to their operators as to their intended targets. These 6 aircraft share a pattern. Clever or urgent design concepts met reality and lost. Whether through underprotection, rushed construction, doctrinal blindness, or sheer desperation, each machine produced outcomes that pilots feared or rejected. The common fault line is trade-offs taken in the wrong direction, sacrificing protection for climb, forward firepower for untested defensive systems, or build quality for speed of delivery. Pilots are not critics in a vacuum. They fly what they're given and face the consequences. When aircraft fail in combat, the result is a painful mix of lost equipment, shattered confidence, and sometimes human tragedy. What these stories also reveal is how wartime pressure warps priorities. In the best cases, innovation yields game-changing fighters that tilt air superiority. In the worst, it produces machines people come to avoid. The line between a brilliant adaptation and a deadly mistake is thin, and crossing it can cost lives. Respecting that human cost is essential when we assess these designs. Ridicule is easy, but understanding the desperate context and the lessons learned is the real value. So there you have it. 6 fighters that pilots spurned, from the graceful but outmatched Fiat CR.42 to the radical and tragic WWII 349. Which of these surprised you most? If you want the follow-up, check out our deep dive into the era's most successful fighters, and let us know in the comments which aircraft you think deserved a second chance, or which one was rightly shunned.